Okay, so we are going to test the autopilot on the 747 just for basic operation. I'm going to take off from Edwards Air Force Base. I've put a small flight plan together. I've actually used a little nav map to make the plan because it's a bit of a novelty. I've just discovered you can load PLN files directly into Flight Simulator 2020, so that kind of changes the game, because you can use other things like SimBrief to make a flight plan and just import it in, which is awesome. So yes, I have got this flight plan ready, and obviously I'll need to go and set the ILS up as part of the setup. So I'm going to come into the FMC, and for runway 23, which is actually 226 degrees. I'm going to program that in. We're going to put the ILS in 110.1, 110.1 goes in the ILS, and that's all we need to do. We're going to use, we'll try out holding navigation, we'll also try out lateral navigation to see if it works. So we're taking off 225, we're going to set the speed to be 200 knots, that's fine for what we're doing. We need to make sure parking brake is off. We will put, flaps are already at 10, so we don't need to put flaps at 10 for takeoff. We will change this to 5,000, we're not going to climb to 10,000 feet on this tiny little route that we're going to do. So it'll just be interesting to see if the aircraft can follow a flight plan or not. And we'll have a play with approach mode on the way into landing as well. So I'm going to take off manually. So we look forwards in the aircraft. And full throttle. And we are rolling. I'm using live weather, so you can see I've got a very slight headwind. You can see it down here. So moves out of the way, let the aircraft accelerate the runway slightly.
V1.
So take off. 10 degrees nose up. Gear up. First thing we'll do is switch the auto throttle to on.
Boeing 747 contact Los Angeles Center on 1 tree, 2 decimal tree.
We're going to ignore air traffic control. So then we will go and switch on the autopilot, we'll switch the flight directors on, and we'll put it into lateral navigation mode, and let's see what the aircraft does. So we will zoom out.
Boeing 747, please acknowledge.
And we're just going to watch what happens. So we should start turning left. I pulled the gear up. I've still got the flaps down because we're not going very fast. So first things first, the speed is obviously not
Boeing 747, did you hear my last transmission?
Is that my fault? Auto throttle is armed. Let's see what happens.
Boeing 747, did you hear my last transmission?
So it's obviously, and it's not taken any notice of the altitude either. Oh, that's because I didn't put it on altitude hold. So, but now I would need to give it a vertical speed to get there. So that needs to be an 8.
Boeing 747 IFR flight plan is cancelled. Radar service terminated. Squawk 1200. Maintain VFR. Frequency change approved.
So that's interesting. So this is turning all on its own. We've gone 2,000 feet higher than we meant to, but that doesn't really matter. I'm just wondering where our flight plan has gone. Well, there it is. So is it going to try and get out to that point out there? To join the plan? Let's just leave it to it and see what it comes up with. So it was on LNAV mode. So it's trying to intersect the line, which makes complete and utter sense. So it's chosen an angle to join the line, and it should turn when it gets there. So I'm going to descend a little bit faster. So the way this should work is we will descend at 1,000 feet a minute until we get to 5,000 feet, and then it will level out all on its own. So this will be a good test to see if it works. We saw on takeoff is certainly an indication that there's not everything is right with the autopilot. It has trouble with LNAV by the look of it. We'll see what happens here. So it should start turning left in a moment to go to about a 45-degree course. And there it goes. So it has intersected the line. That's interesting. So it did work. I wonder what happened on takeoff then that it didn't like. It may have been my own flight plan programming that was not very good. But admittedly, I did get to a few hundred feet off the ground and immediately engage the autopilot and just let it get on with it, which may not have been the best thing to do in the world. Obviously, yeah, you can see the altitude has leveled out as well, so that's working. So let's throw out some curveballs. Let's give it 5-degree flap instead of 10-degree and see what happens to the altitude and the speed. So the throttles are coming off to compensate for less drag. We've lost 100 feet off the altitude. Oh no, we haven't. It's flipped up. It's because of the way the meter looks. I've noticed that the way their meters work, it goes from 90 through 0. The zeros appear before the hundreds. That's before the thousands. The hundreds appear before the thousands. So let's put 10 degrees of flap back in. So the indicated airspeed is not being reflected. So it's not quite. Oh, it is again. Again, it's a gauge problem. The zeros are rolling round before the next digit, which makes it look like it's the wrong speed. But if you actually look at the tape, it is absolutely correct. It's doing 200 knots. So we're flying round. We'll come back down. We'll drop this down to. Let's just have a look outside first to see how low we are. See, we're pretty low. I don't want to go any lower really. So yeah, I'll leave the altitude alone. It's absolutely correct that it won't change altitude when you just change the indicator here. You set your target altitude, but then you have to give it a vertical speed to get there, or you can do a flight level change, which will do it much more aggressively. So we're just going to see what happens with this. So if we change and see if it follows the trek accurately. If it does, it will answer a lot. So there's the hill that I turned at on the last demonstration flight when I turned manually back towards the base. We're going out a little bit further. We can now see the ILS beam. We've got the horizontal marker there, and the vertical marker is going further and further away because we're now below the vertical component of the beacon, of the glide slope. This will be interesting to see. I've not tried approach mode at all. I don't know if it has auto land built into it. We'll soon find out though, won't we? So it should start banking left anytime soon. So we still have LNAV engaged. Interesting. That should have turned already. Okay, so LNAV doesn't work reliably, which is nice to know, I guess. Luckily, we can. Interesting. So maybe this wasn't rendering it correctly on the instruments. Maybe that's what's going on. So it's still in LNAV mode, even though I've changed the heading bug up here. I haven't switched to heading hold mode. It's still in LNAV, or lateral navigation. So I think it's more of a rendering issue on the instrument than anything else. That may be what happened at the start as well. That would explain what we saw, because there was an absence of a line when we came away from the runway, and it looked like it was wildly out of control, but it wasn't. It was just making a hard turn. So that's worked pretty much as you would have expected it to. It's now converging on the line. So if we go and look outside, the airbase over there. So yes, this is a rendering issue. It's going for the waypoint before it turns. Of course, you could argue that it should be sticking to the line and not trying to get to the waypoint, but that is the problem that's going on. Makes it all very obvious now. Interesting. Okay, let's see what happens when it gets to the waypoint. It should suddenly turn hard left. Okay, this is making sense. So the amount the line is drawn in the diagram, the radius of the corners is too big. Because at the moment you can see that's a 10-mile range. And travelling at 200 knots, it does not take 10 miles for a 747 to turn around, probably only 1 mile. So let's just try this then. So we know we are, so I'll put the gear down. We're still at 5,000 feet. We are below the ILS still. So we should be able to pick up approach mode. So we engage approach mode because we're still below the glide slope beam. and the plane is doing it on its own. So I'll start dropping the flaps. We're going to 20-degree flap. We'll slow the indicated airspeed, sorry, to 180 knots, and it's happening. And the throttles are coming up, you can hear them, to steady us at 180, so that's working fine. Let's drop it again to 160. Let's go for 25-degree flap. Flap, so we're on full flaps. And we'll go for 150 knots. So we'll look outside, there's the runway. So this will be interesting actually. So this is going to let me get down to 140 without any real issues, which is kind of what you'd expect. In fact, let's go for 130 and see how slow it can go sensibly. We will have a look from outside. We may as well. So it's holding the speed remarkably well. I think the thing that's throwing people is there are rendering issues. Why is it not dropping to 130 now? Is that a law type issue with the aircraft? Where what I'm asking for it to do, it won't do it. I wonder if that's what's going on, where it will not drop the indicated airspeed on the auto throttle. Interesting. So we're approaching the runway.
400.
So this will be interesting to see what happens. So, recent to the view.
200.
So what just happened? Approach mode has disengaged all on its own. Interesting. So let's turn the autopilot off. See if we can still put it on the ground. So there are significant issues with the autopilot. I have to turn the auto throttle off, have I?
100.
So even though I disarmed it, it still didn't disable it.
30. 20. 10.
So full reverse thrust. And we're down. So that was unpleasant, wasn't it? So yes, there are significant issues with the autopilot. On general use, just flying along, it's fine. But as soon as you get into approach mode and things like that, it seems to be significant problems. So there we go. I'm not going to bother recording the taxi back to the terminal because it's a bit silly. So there you go. Anyway.